A young man is fishing on a river. He's already got a fish on his feet, so now he's chasing it downstream like a fine fisherman. Clearly, it isn't his first time fishing on these banks. He's quite experienced in this job. The name of this young man is Augustine, or Gus for short, and he's already quite a bit into his lone adventure to find himself and make sense of his life. Now, from the midpoint of his story, let's jump back and see where it all started. As he says, the last minutes of a fish's life are much like the first minutes of a human's. They are both taken out of the water. The fish is whacked on its head to put it out of its misery, while a human baby is whacked on its behind in order to put it into its misery, which is life. Gus Orveston's family is one of the most unusual ones. Fishing is the main theme that goes through every Orveston's life. Gus caught his first fish with the help of his mother when he was very little, and from then on, water has always been on his mind. His mother is a strong believer in bait fishing, while his father is quite the opposite. He is all for fly fishing. This isn't the only difference in the family, though. The father, William, has a much calmer character, while the mother, Mai, is much more explosive. To end with the differences in the family, we must mention the last member, Gus's younger brother Bill Bob, the kid who has a wonderful ability to ignore everything that is even remotely connected to water. Perhaps it is a sort of defense mechanism that proved to be very advantageous to him, since Gus has always struggled with a lot of normal things, thanks to his close connection to fishing. And to illustrate this point, it is enough to look at the next scene. His father, William, whom Gus also calls H2O, is presenting his new book, and naturally, his oldest son is helping with the boxes. From the second floor of the building, he sees a group of people gathered around a small pool. A blonde girl is teaching anyone who wishes how to use a fishing rod. Gus has never seen a girl interested in fishing, let alone knowing how to use a rod like that. Perhaps this is exactly why he has never had a girlfriend so far. He would love to go down there now and join this group of people, but he has to help H2O. The latter seems to have been raised in a family of English aristocrats, from whom he inherited his speech and manners. He sends Gus to fetch some more boxes full of books, even though it is clearly not necessary. Gus comes out with a slight objection, but it isn't enough to win the battle, so he walks away to fulfill his father's request. Looking down towards the pool, he realizes, with a bit of disappointment, that the girl is already gone. He goes back inside the building with no intention to fetch the boxes, and walks around for a while, until he comes across a man dressed up in a suit, presenting new legislation to a group of people. Here, Gus sees the girl for the second time. She raises her hand to ask a question, but soon everybody understands that asking a simple question isn't her purpose at all. She wants to fight this legislation that, as it turns out, puts wild salmon in danger. The man in the suit then opposes her well-laid-out points with the argument of lowered taxes and new jobs, and as the girl sees that there is no way of reaching a conclusion, she does something eccentric. She lights a cigar and puts it out in his water cup. She is taken out of the area forcefully. She fights the officer at first, screaming at the man in the suit, and in this chaos, a small object falls out of her pocket without her noticing. When everything is over, it is none other than Gus who takes it in his hands. As his story continues, we learn that he is preparing to leave his parents' house. It is no wonder. Both the mother and the father are so consumed by their enormous egos that they fail to notice how their son is growing more and more distant. It seems that one simple encounter could be enough to push Gus towards moving away, and this simple encounter happens in the next scene. Of course it is about fish, and of course it holds no significance. The disagreement between Ma, Gus, and H2O is quite funny and comical, but it all changes as Gus becomes fed up with it all and becomes aggressive. He explodes completely, turning first to his dad and telling him everything he truly thinks about him. Then to his mom, after which he's slapped in the face, and then moves away towards the living room mantel, takes down their prized fish named Nijinsky, and throws it into flames. This fish has been in this family since before Gus was even born, and it has haunted his entire life. William and Ma stop chasing him after this action. Gus goes up into his room, and no words are spoken until the next morning, when Gus finally gets into his truck and leaves his childhood home with the purpose to find himself. Fishing is everything he knows, so it is no wonder that he chooses a small cabin located near the banks of a river as his new home. Even during his initial walk-around, the young man feels at peace. He feels as if, until now, his life has been nothing but a loading screen, and it is finally about to begin. He comes up with a strict schedule, and decides to stick to it no matter what. And this is what his schedule consists of: fishing, eating, preparing for the next day's fishing, and sleeping. This is an easy, peaceful, and beautiful way to live an orderly life. Since his father is a master of fly fishing, Gus is proficient in creating intricate flies, so in the next scene, when he finds he needs money, he goes to a local fly shop with the intention of selling his craft. The old man behind the counter immediately notices his skill and says he will buy all of his flies. But this is but the first pleasant interaction of Gus's day. On his way back towards his cabin, a group of young children block his way. Right off the bat, it is clear that they are a talkative, energetic bunch. The older one of them, Kearney, introduces himself and all his siblings, Bernie, Marlene, Charlene, Darlene, and Ernie, whom, hilariously enough, they also call Hemingway. The interaction is ridiculous. Gus is clearly overwhelmed by the good intentions of these people. Never before has he encountered a bunch of people who are initially predisposed to be kind to him. They leave him for a while, then come back with a huge variety of complimentary products. All in all, it is clear that Gus is extremely lucky to have such neighbors around. That day, Gus does something in the ordinary, something that has never been in his character. Perhaps influenced by today's kind interactions, he catches a trout and, instead of putting it out of its misery, ponders restlessly for a while. He rushes towards his cabin, then, holding the trout in his hands, fills up an aquarium and provides the fish with another home. He even gives it a name, Alfred. The next day, after overlooking massive landscapes, he goes back into the river with his boat and paddles through a thick fog. In this ominous weather, another boat passes him by. The man is on the boat, looking for a fisherman named Abe. He asks Gus if he saw anyone in the river or on its banks, but Gus hasn't seen anybody. After the boat glides by and the sound of the man screaming fades away, Gus takes out his rod and starts fishing. This is when one of the most significant things in his life happens. The rod grabs onto something, pushes it back, and he sees a bloated white body emerge from the depths of the river. An initial panic overwhelms him. He tries to pull it up, but in trying, is eventually dragged down into the river. Still, he doesn't leave his endeavor after the first failed attempt. With a lot of effort, he manages to get the body into his boat. The vessel is already filled with water though, and because of this, Gus himself cannot get inside of it. Instead, he has to drag the boat upstream until he reaches a pier. A man who happens to be there helps him up, and exhausted, Gus soon falls asleep. Gloomy dreams about the abyss, God, and nature haunt his mind until, when it's already dark, he is woken up by quite an interesting character. His name is Titus, and he gives Gus a ride back to his cabin. Despite knowing what Gus just went through, this individual maintains an unusually cheerful tone while addressing him. He explains to him why his day shouldn't be ruined by such inconvenience, and even though Gus has neither the capacity nor the will to listen to and agree to him, he still cannot help but like him. Finally, Titus gives Gus a monocle as a gift and drops him off. Throughout the next day, chilling thoughts domesticate Gus's mind. Now he sees very clearly the fate that one way or another, everyone shares, and to his mind, it doesn't matter what you do or how you live your life, the end is inevitable. That night, he feels particularly lonely. A strong urge to start all over again to refresh his mind suddenly comes over him, and he quickly starts giving everything to flames. Old notebooks, posters, and even the schedule on the wall end up on the stove. A single memory comes to him then. In this memory, he's sitting with Billy Bob, who explains to him the strange concept of a guardian angel. It is, as it turns out, a twin that everybody has, the exact copy of ourselves who lives underground, until we switch places with them. This lovely concept conveyed by the kind-hearted kid warms Gus's mind even now, as he's overwhelmed by the most distressing thoughts of all. And thus, the depressing sense of loneliness disappears. The next morning, Gus goes for a swim. With his new monocle in hand, he sees a picture that freezes him to the ground for a while. The blonde girl he saw earlier is standing on the opposite side of the river, fishing with a self-made wooden rod. It looks like she's trying to pull something up at first, but when that doesn't work, suddenly she throws the rod down into the river, gets rid of everything she's wearing, and goes after it. Gus is smitten. Leaving his monocle lying on the ground there, he dashes towards a big rock and hides behind it. As it seems, however, he chose the worst spot, since soon he sees the girl coming straight towards him. She gets up on the rock with the fish she just caught, and lies beside it to dry herself up in the sun. All the while, Gus is afraid to move an inch. His embarrassment will be immeasurable if he is caught in this position. Finally, with all the wit that is still scarcely available to him, he comes up with the idea to stealthily go back into the woods and start whistling. It works. The girl thinks that somebody is slowly walking by somewhere nearby, and quickly gets dressed. When Gus appears from the bushes, she is visibly afraid. And so, this is the situation in which they have their first conversation. The sight of this girl and her undivided attention seem to force Gus into forgetting how to use his speech. His numbed muscles fail to catch up with his brain. Their initial conversation is hilarious, but it ends quite soon, as Gus tries to run away as quickly as possible. Upon bidding her farewell, he walks away and, for some reason, climbs a tree. The girl notices him, of course. Now, after seeing this confused boy, her initial fear is gone and she tries to initiate a conversation. But Gus's answers are still short and scarcely thought out. It is only when the girl stops trying and heads towards the river that Gus comes back to his senses. He knows there is one big thing they have in common, fishing, so he asks her not to go, and out of nowhere, he starts quoting Izaak Walton, the author of one of the most important environmental books in history. This is the starting point of the second part of their encounter, the part in which they understand each other and appreciate the things they have in common. At last they tell each other their names, and we learn that the girl is called Eddie. Finally, before the bond between them is further strengthened, a fish grabs onto Eddie's self-made rod, and the girl disappears under the water again. Now, Gus climbs down from his tree, runs towards the river to help out, and upon arriving there, finds out with disappointment and confusion that the girl is gone without a trace. Gus is unable to see Eddie, but soon we see her, walking back to where Gus first saw her. His monocle is still there, so she grabs it and takes it with her. This meeting, and the sudden disappearance of the girl, throw Gus into deep thoughts once more. With Eddie's rod, he fishes for a while, as if he were trying to catch something more than a fish from the depths of the water. But his thoughts are interrupted by none other than Titus. The man is trying to fish on his own, and since he clearly has no idea how to do it properly, he injures himself. This is when Gus calls out to him and helps him out. Titus notices his rod then, and with this, he invites himself into Gus's cabin to hear about the long story behind this self-made device. It is already evening in the next scene, and Titus has heard everything about Eddie. 2 times, Gus saw this girl, and both times she slipped away from his grasp totally unnoticed. Gus is desperate, he's sure he won't ever see her again. The way Titus sees it, Gus has 3 consolations. First, there is a good chance that they might find each other again, so there is still hope. Second, he can dip his sorrows into alcohol. And third, he can turn to philosophy. This latter is the area in which Titus is the most proficient, and so Gus is invited to go to Portland, where Titus resides. The agreement is as follows: Gus will teach Titus how to fish, while starting tomorrow, Titus will in turn guide him through the maze of philosophy. Before they go to Portland, the guest gets interested in the bait Gus is holding. To show him how it works, Gus opens the ceiling of his aquarium, and forgets to close it as they both leave the cabin. The next morning, Gus is sleeping in Titus's living room. Rested in a rocking chair, he hears the soft growling of a dog and opens his eyes. The dog barks in his face, but Gus is so afraid to move that he stays intact and calls out for Titus. Fortunately, the latter has just returned from grocery shopping. He says that the dog won't bite until given a reason to. The chair in which Gus is sitting right now belongs to the dog. Soon, Gus learns that his name is Descartes, and as Titus claims, he is trying to become human, just as humans try to become divine. This is why he loves that rocking chair so much. Now, after this unusual discourse, Titus kneels in front of his books and starts collecting some of them. This is the way he likes to fish for happiness, through stories and ideas. And even though Gus seems to hate his approach at first, the notion of looking for something that isn't on the surface is well known to him. The only difference now is that he has to learn how to skillfully throw the rod in his own mind and wait patiently to find meaning there, just like he tends to catch trout in the rushing rivers. Titus puts it so well that Gus cannot help but yield back and accept the challenge. When he gets back to his cabin that evening, he finds something has changed. Alfred seems to have escaped the aquarium and is now lying on the floor. Taken out of its natural habitat, the fish was clearly eager to get back to it. From Alfred's story, there is clearly something to be learned. The next day, Gus remembers the small object that fell from Eddie's pocket that day. It is the keyring of a company, and Gus decides to go back to Portland and call it. The person on the other side, however, tells him that Eddie doesn't work with them anymore, so this attempt proves to be futile. Gus sees someone throwing a beer towards a stream. He goes in that direction and finds a muddy pool, created by construction waste. A lone fish is swimming inside, and so Gus creates a small rod to catch it. He does it with fine skill and creativity, totally unaware that, through his own monocle, Eddie is actually watching him as he goes. Eddie likes what she's seeing, the way Gus gets it to return the fish to its natural habitat, the blue and open bay. That afternoon, together with Titus, he goes to a pub. There, while playing some pool, Titus conducts one of the most swift and skillful sessions of Socratic questioning, after which Gus's mind reaches new horizons of thinking. His worldview also changes, and his attitude towards life and its meaning becomes more positive. Going to the river the next day, he encounters a middle-aged man trying to fish. Immediately upon arrival, Gus manages to catch a fish, while the man has been there for a long time, waiting around completely fruitlessly. Gus catches his attention immediately, and he walks up to him with the intention of having a conversation. At first, Gus is reluctant to open up to this stranger, but soon they become friends. The young man even teaches the other how to make the most efficient bait. The man is extremely impressed with this young, seemingly unexperienced fellow, who happens to have extreme skill and knowledge of this subject. Gus turns out to be fortunate this day. As we soon learn, the middle-aged man is one of the most famous Dutch reporters, who writes for a newspaper called Post Telegram, and after today's interaction, he is excited to write about this incredible young man. Gus knows this man and his writing. It's safe to say he's starstruck. Gus would have never even dreamed of such an opportunity, so naturally, his answer is yes. And so, the next morning, H2O and his wife read about their son in the Post Telegram. Gus has tried to hide his identity, saying that Gus is only a nickname, while his true name is Antoine, but his parents can see through this lie, of course. At the end of the letter, Gus asks the reporter to include a message to a certain girl, asking her to meet him at the river. The message is written in such a clever and funny way that Eddie cannot help but smile. She is invited to come with a loaded gun, if she's particularly afraid for her safety, and take from Gus the rod she left on the river that day. The report results in sudden fame. Gus starts selling his handmade gear and starts giving out free fishing advice. His cabin fills with strangers, and for the first time in his new life, he starts reconnecting with the outer world. Halloween comes around then, and he gets invited to a party. His neighbors are incredibly nice, but seeing them from afar, Gus realizes he prefers to be alone. He turns back, feeling some unexplainable anger towards his futile attempts to find peace, and suddenly notices a string of smoke coming from his cabin. Someone is there. Slowly, Gus approaches the window and opens the door. It is Eddie, waiting for him with a toy gun. She's in a particularly playful and theatrical mood. She acts as if she were taking part in an exciting thriller, demanding that she be given her handmade rod and the fish she caught that day. Half-heartedly, Gus does as he is bid, and tells her that he wasn't expecting her arrival at all. This reminds Eddie of something. Quickly, her mood changes, and she starts telling Gus how she disappeared that day. The reason for her arrival slowly reveals itself as she says that she found a certain spying device downstream. No thorough investigation was needed for her to conclude that Gus was spying on her. Now, standing in front of her, Gus has to quickly come up with a convincing explanation. A little ashamed at first, he interrupts Eddie's angry monologue and justifies himself pretty well. He was really coming down to the river for a swim until he saw something unimaginably beautiful, and more importantly, a person whose motions and energy emanated a kind of worldview that was closest to his own. The moment was mesmerizing, and he couldn't think about what was right and polite, so he's not sorry. He believes it is one's right to be shocked and to be taken by a powerful tide of love at first sight. We can tell that Gus wasn't planning on saying the last bit, but it's clear that Eddie's anger has completely vanished. She even starts laughing after recalling how Gus spoke from the tree that day. He truly is one of a kind, so naturally, Eddie gets interested. What is he doing here all alone? Gus's answer is ambiguous. After a bit of silence, he says he's fishing and returns the question back to Eddie. The latter's answer is also ambiguous. She says she's fishing too. They walk into the woods, then Eddie shares what provoked curiosity in Gus. She remembers the day she saw him catch a fish in Portland, and a time when she met a kid who called himself Hemingway and told stories of a fisherman named Gus. The couple reaches a high ridge then, overlooking a massive landscape, and Eddie remembers how she read the letter over and over again, knowing that it was Gus. The moment up on the ridge is magical and illuminated by the strange light of the moon. They kiss each other for the first time. That night Eddie stays at his cabin, and the next morning while walking around the river, without even thinking about it, he opens his heart to her. He tells her about the feud between him and his parents, and the destruction of their prized fish Nijinsky. With this, we are transported back to his previous home, where his father and his mother are sitting quietly. The house is hollowed out, and the heads of the couple there are filled with memories of how they met each other. In this memory, age 20, a young, skilled fisherman, is trying to catch an enormous fish. He follows it around for a long time, until both the man and his wife are on the verge of exhaustion. He doesn't falter though. With strong dedication, he hops over rocks and rushes into the river, but all this for nothing. Soon, another fisherman gets in his way and ruins his fishing line. Enraged, he tramples towards this fisherman, clearly looking for a fight, but upon arrival he sees a woman who plunges towards him with the same amount of will to engage in a fist fight for the fish. Age 20 surrenders immediately and sits down on a rock nearby. He doesn't know yet that this woman is his future wife, and the mother of his future son. Soon she catches the fish, offers him a drink, and that night, she comes up with a new perspective to look at their meeting. Age 20 chased the enormous fish to the point of exhaustion, and Ma caught it. They connect with each other easily and forcefully, naming the fish Nijinsky and deciding to never catch another one together. Now, coming back to their home, the two of them sit together, their eyes seem more sad and their connection more firm. They are dedicated to turning their home into a place that Gus will at least want to visit. That night, Eddie comes out of the cabin to see Gus holding a feather. He says that it is a Dreffy, the selected relic of today's adventure. His brother, Bill Bob, was the one to come up with this concept, and he was so invested that he wouldn't go to sleep without it. It is a wonder what relics their future days will bring. The next morning, Gus is woken up by Eddie, who is eager to go fishing with him. She urges him to gather the lightest gear he owns, and together for the first time, they go down the river to catch some fish. Eddie is planning to leave for Portland today, so they don't have much time. This is exactly the reason why Gus is a little skeptical about their endeavor. At this time, the only fish that swim in these waters are Chinook, a kind of huge fish that needs a day of chasing around until it's exhausted enough to yield to this kind of rod. But Eddie still goes on with it. Clearly she has a plan, and soon we'll understand what's on her mind. A Chinook falls for her bait, and she hands the rod to Gus, only to leave him pinned to the river while she runs towards her truck and drives away to Portland. Gus is unable to leave the rod and follow her, so the chase between an enormous fish and a dedicated fisherman begins, and we are back to where we started. History almost repeats itself as Gus follows the restless Chinook until it's dark. He doesn't feel like an ordinary fisherman anymore. He is a traveler now, following a fish into the darkness. And with some intangible power that comes from an unusual sense of responsibility, Gus manages to achieve victory in this battle. Finally, he approaches the end of his fishing line and sees the Chinook wriggling slowly. With a sparkle of decision lights in his eyes, Gus dives down, unhooks the fish, gives it a gentle nudge, and lets it swim away freely. That night he sleeps in the woods, and the next morning he is woken up by the first rays of sunlight. As his consciousness glides from the dream world, he feels as if his journey is over. He has arrived at his destination, and there is nowhere else to go. Comfortable in his own skin, and stripped away from the dreadful sense of bleak loneliness, he gathers up his gear and walks the woods. The morning gifts an unexpected miracle. He comes across Eddie sitting by a tree, waiting for him. No words are spoken, as their bodies and their souls are merged after yesterday's adventure. All that there is a sunny meadow, daisies, and their love. In the next scene, Gus is working in his cabin while Eddie sits on a rock in the middle of the river. She hears a noise coming from upstream and decides to follow it. Gus doesn't notice her departure, so after finishing up, he starts looking for her. Soon he encounters a heartwarming picture. His mother and Eddie are standing together fly fishing, while his father is hidden behind a rock nearby, using Ma's method of fishing. Bill Bob is there too, playing with rocks. A lot is reflected in this picture, most importantly, the decision of Gus's parents to leave their senseless principals behind. After all that he went through and after seeing this meaningful scene, Gus plunges towards Ma and embraces her firmly. Perhaps for the first time, he embraces his father too, and Eddie sees the great reunion of the previously severed family. And all grudges are taken away by the current of the small river that, in the light of this story, symbolizes love.